Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about The People's Joker. First heard about this movie when it was supposed to play at TIFF, and it got a cease and desist sort of thing. Maybe not really a cease and desist, but Warner Brothers asked them to not play The People's Joker, and then I guess resulted in finally getting released like 2 years later, or 2.5 years later, something like that. And then it opens with a fair use warning, which was interesting. I'm used to YouTube videos and reviews, not actual movies. But I think this is an interesting use of parody, an interesting use of the idea of superheroes as our modern myth or modern Greek gods and stuff like that, which has often been attributed to people like Stan Lee and other comic book writers talking about the importance of superheroes. But also, I think, much like something like RRR, showing the influence of Hollywood superhero films and comic books. And what Vera Drew does is sort of do what literature has done, countless other things have done, where it takes on the idea of the Joker and Batman, and particularly like the Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix and a lot of the Tim Burton and especially Joel Schumacher Batman, winds it up with her own coming of age sort of trans origin story, making her go from a Joker to a Harlequin, showing her going from comedy and finding out her true self, the deal with being a comedian, showing her transformation, but showing it with the iconography of superheroes. Like, she's Harley Quinn in some places, she's the Joker, she's dating Jared Leto version of Joker from Suicide Squad, she's friends with the Penguin and they have an alt comedy theater together, or is it like a not comedy? I forget. But all these kind of things where, like, you know, normally I think people go, if you're doing a coming of age film, like, that is your friend, that is this. But if you've been reading comic books and watching superhero movies your whole life, like, these characters mean more to you, and much like people would have a different version of Romeo and Juliet or Hamlet or Homer's The Odyssey, or play around with those because those are in the public domain. But culturally, I would say superheroes occupy that space in our modern context. So to take that and to twist it and make it sort of within your own story makes this probably one of the most interesting superhero movies in years, and probably one of the most interesting superhero films of all time. The ramifications of this, as more of these characters become into the public domain, is probably greater than we realize now if trends work out. I mean, the Joker is going to be in the public domain sort of soon. Some of these other characters will, not all, but at a certain point there will be a time where all of them are, and there will be no legal problems with this, and there'll be more works that aren't just like, I take thing and make it a slasher movie, which we have seen. And also the idea of someone having the media literacy to understand and play with these terms. You know, I find this movie maybe more fascinating than, you know, at a trailer you'd probably think this looks like, you know, a Channel Awesome team up movie or something. And it does look crappy and stuff, but Vera Drew was an editor for people like Tim and Eric and all sorts of kind of Adult Swim sort of alt comedy sort of stuff like that. And she's a very smart filmmaker, but I think using those aesthetics like purposefully, I think a lot of those people on YouTube we used to see who did it, or like The Incredible Bulk or stuff like that, they use it because they're like not good filmmakers. I don't think they might say, oh, well, you're limited by the budget. I'm like, I don't know if like that would have helped. This is different because it feels like purposefully using that. And I do think if you are like a true cinephile, or like you're really into movies and stuff, you should be able to see through whatever kind of style or artifice or however style or however the film is presented. You should be able to understand like what it's trying to say with that, even if it's not done in currently considered a good production or technically good or technically, you know, impressive and stuff like that. This is a different film. This is sort of like more an alternative movie than I think most art houses, which are just not really doing. They don't really do alternative stuff that much, and this feels that way. I was taken aback by this movie because first, I don't really like I'm not a huge fan of the Joel Schumacher ones, except because I grew up with them, but I was able to sort of see how someone would see themselves through these things. I think Vera Drew is a really compelling presence on screen. I really liked watching her the whole time. I can definitely see her being in more stuff as time goes on, probably bigger stuff, but I liked how her presence really carried this whole film. But I think she's a really smart filmmaker, because to use this stuff and, you know, sort of make, it's mainly a parody film, which I keep hearing are going to come back eventually, but I feel like she did that in a very different way. It's not just like, here's a random reference to something. Like, if there's a reference to something, I think they one time say like fuck Frank Miller or something. But aside from that, it's like pretty clever about what it's doing. Like, the idea that Penguin would be into alt comedy that's kind of funny, and probably would be. And having all these like supervillains be into comedy because she's like, comedians are miserable people. The idea of like Batman in this is like this sort of almost fascist dictator, and how all comedy is legal unless it's on UCB Live, which is like, I think in this accounts for United Cloud Broadcasting, but in the UCB is the Upright Citizens Brigade, and how like all comedy is controlled this like one specific way. Like, I also like that it not only takes on the myth of superheroes and like the idea of superheroes and twists them and makes them into their own story, but also the myth of comedy itself, and like how comedy works, and how you are viewed as a successful comedian, how the only type of comedy that can succeed is under this one lens. Like the only way to make it is to get on the show is interesting. I will say, as watching it, I had a really good time for most of it. I did feel like it waned a little, and like the energy towards the end is odd, but like definitely like on purpose. Like, nothing about this film is like sort of I think because of its shit production, you could sort of fall into, because it switches from like bad everyone's in front of bad blue screens to like bad animation to like more N64 animation, stuff like that, but all on purpose. So I think like when you think of like the films that at least aesthetically look like this, they're much worse, and you should laugh at them. This is not the film to make fun of, and there's like a real smart brain that Deirdre did with making this. Like, she clearly had a specific vision for it, and I really like that about this. Like, this is probably one of the more fascinating auteur statements I've seen this year. A real cinephile kind of movie, because it's difficult to get into, it's weird, it's strange. I love that the theater I went to, I saw it at Nighthawk in Brooklyn, which Deirdre made a pre-show for, which was cool. Glad I got to see that. The theater was actually packed. It was a small theater, but it was still sold out, and it was like a Tuesday. So I think that'll work out for this. I hope it works out for this movie. I could see this being a big cult movie, and rightfully so. It is so original and sort of different. I like how it messed with the Joker stuff. I like the idea of like messing with the legacy of Batman and taking on both movie stuff and comic book stuff and switching on and off with them, which it often feels like we even do in our minds sometimes. This is someone who loves, I would say, comic books and their story almost like in tandem and like mixing them. It's a really fascinating movie, and I think I often like to think about it a lot. Like, I've been thinking about it a lot, and the ideas of it, and like the idea of using myth in this way. I'm wondering, with the idea of using this is our myths with superhero things, stuff like that. This is all mainly DC, but I am curious, like, as we see more of these characters in the public domain, this really opens up a lot of ideas, and I find this film really fascinating. I find it much more interesting than the Joker, which this uses a lot of iconography from and like messes with that movie a bit. But I think apparently Deirdre likes the Joker, and I'm not the biggest fan, but I thought how she used some of that in this really interesting, because it is like how someone comes out, how someone becomes the Joker. That is sort of what you think about at this point. Like, it's kind of using our cinematic language, but our superhero cinematic language. Most people say that's not cinema, or it doesn't have language and all that stuff. I think Deirdre respects them as much as she respects like her own unique vision. A lot of this is because this movie was cheap as hell, and it looks that way. But I like when movies are cheap as hell and like have their own unique thing. And like, it was weird seeing this in the theater. I feel like I should watch this on the laptop because of the quality, but I sort of love it for that. I think this is one of the more interesting superhero movies I've seen in a while. Probably a major milestone in superhero cinema and comic book cinema that there ever has been. I'm curious what this will bring in the coming decade, because it really could bring about a lot of people using their own personal stories with IP, because that is how they've understand storytelling and stories and myth and what they relate to and what they're comforted by. And if that is the case, then people will use that iconography, and maybe there should be a statue of the law or something for people, as long as it's in good faith or whatever, to do that. And I think this film makes that case quite tremendously, but also doesn't fucking care. It's like, that's her story. She can bring it and bring on these things, and it's almost so defiant. I've heard it called punk rock, and I do think it is sort of like this almost like it's like what many people would call anti-art. I don't really think it's anti-art. I think it is like pro-art, but it's so pro, like, let's mix these things and create something new. That's almost more pro-art than anything, really, than most movies are, because it's like, we should be able to create our own vision with whatever we want to. And I think it says a lot about remix culture. It says obviously a lot about trans and gay culture, but I think it's such a deeper movie than people give it credit for, and the influence that it could open up is quite astounding. Like, sometimes you see a movie and like, oh, maybe we'll have some more cool explosions and stuff. This is like, what if I took these on and told my own story through these superheroes, and what could it mean? And like, I find that to be really interesting. It's a really interesting, different kind of movie, and I think we need some of these to shake up your cinematic brain sometimes. So I would really recommend this film. It is coming from a completely different perspective on how to adapt stories, obviously from Rhea Drake's own personal coming-of-age story, but it really messes with the superhero genre more so than I've seen a film do in quite a while. The fact that she was able to do it on a really minuscule budget, the film that looks as trashy as it does, but almost intentionally, it's like ironic. It reminds me of John Waters, it reminds me of Tim and Eric, it reminds me of all those things. It's a wonderful kind of celebration of cinema and what we can do with our stories, mixed with the things that we did grow up with and we understood as cinema, and we understood as storytelling, and the things we love, showing both what the culture we are in is and who we are as we are defined by the culture that we took in, and how that has made us who we are now. Kind of sounds perfect for a coming-of-age story, and I think this film is going to maybe go down as something maybe film critics and scholars and dorks like more than the average person, but it's their loss, because I think this is a real incredible movie, and it is the people's Joker. I consider this more my Joker than all that Joaquin Phoenix stuff. I think this was a real interesting, different cult movie, and I hope it is a guiding light for cult movies to come. So if you've seen The People's Joker and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.